I married him believing that love was eternal and that the promises we whispered under the moonlight would last forever, and that no storm could shake the bond we had built over months of laughter and whispered dreams. And though we were young and reckless and often misunderstood by the world around us, I had never felt more certain in my life than the moment I placed my hand in his and vowed to be his forever, and though people warned me that marrying at such a young age was foolish and that passion often fades into regret, I felt invincible and untouchable, and every night we would lie awake talking about our future, about the house we would build, about the family we would have, about the adventures we would take together. And for a time it was perfect, or at least it felt perfect, until the day he fell ill, or at least that is what I thought, because the doctors whispered words I could barely understand and the world around me seemed to collapse in slow motion, and I held his hand and watched as he grew weaker, and my heart ached in ways I could not describe, and I felt an emptiness grow inside me as if the very air around me had been stolen. And then the call came that he had passed away, and I remember the funeral as though it was a nightmare I could not wake from. I remember the rain falling softly on my hair as I watched his casket being lowered into the ground, and I felt a hollow emptiness swallowing me whole, and everyone cried and comforted me, but I felt nothing except the cold grip of despair. And yet even in that moment of grief, when the world seemed to have ended, a message appeared on my phone, and at first I thought it was a mistake or a cruel joke, but the words were unmistakable, and they froze my blood and made my knees weak. "I am still alive, trust no one." And my mind spun, and I could not breathe, and I did not know what to think, because the person I had mourned so deeply, the person I had loved with every fiber of my being, was somehow still out there, still watching, still capable of sending me a message that would shake my reality to its core. And the world around me felt unreal as I tried to understand who could have sent this and why, and if it was him, how had it been possible? And 1,000 questions collided in my mind, and I felt a terror unlike anything I had ever known. And in the days that followed, I became obsessed with discovering the truth, and I watched the shadows of our empty home and replayed our last conversations in my mind, and wondered if every smile, every kiss, every word had been a lie or a prelude to a secret I had never known. And then little things began to happen, small signs that maybe he had never really left, that maybe the person everyone had buried was not the man I thought I knew. And as I dug deeper, I uncovered truths that made my heart pound and my soul tremble, and secrets that had been hidden in plain sight. And as I pieced together the fragments of his life and my life, I realized that the world I thought I knew had been an illusion, and that the people around me had masks that hid intentions darker than I could have imagined. And the message was only the beginning of a journey into lies, betrayal, love, obsession, and fear that would consume every waking moment of my life. And I had to decide if I could trust my own instincts, if I could navigate a world where nothing was certain, and where even the person I loved most could become my greatest danger. And as the nights grew longer and the whispers in the dark became louder, I knew that my life had been forever altered, and that every choice from that day forward would be a step deeper into a mystery that had no clear end. And yet even in the fear and the doubt and the loneliness, I felt a strange pull toward him, toward the man I thought I had lost, and toward a truth that was both terrifying and irresistible. And so I kept moving forward into the unknown, driven by love, by curiosity, by a need to uncover what had discovered things about myself, things I had never known, and realized that life and death and love and betrayal were all intertwined in ways that no one could fully explain. And that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found in the smallest gestures, in the tiniest signals, in the faintest whispers. And though I was scared and exhausted, and sometimes wanted to give up, I could not, because the story was not finished, because the man who had haunted my dreams and my memories was still out there. And the message had proven that nothing was as it seemed, and I had to see it through to the end, even if the end was something I could not imagine, even if it broke me completely, even if it changed me forever. And so I walked into each day with a mix of dread and determination, knowing that every moment could bring revelation or destruction, and that the life I had known had ended the moment I received that message, and that from that moment onward nothing would ever be the same. The days after the funeral were unbearable as I moved through the motions of life with a hollow feeling in my chest, and a weight pressing down on my shoulders that no one could see and no one could understand, and every sound seemed louder, every shadow darker, and every glance from a stranger felt like it carried secrets that I could not decipher. And I kept checking my phone over and over, hoping for another message, hoping for a clue, hoping for anything that could explain how he could be alive and why he would send such a terrifying note. And as the nights grew longer and colder, I found myself unable to sleep, unable to eat, unable to think about anything except the impossibility of the words I had read and the face of the man I had loved, who was supposed to be gone forever, and yet somehow was not. And then one night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard a faint knock at the door, and my heart froze and my hands shook as I got up and approached the entrance. And when I opened it, there Was no one there, just the empty hallway and the faint echo of footsteps that could have been my imagination, and I felt a chill crawl down my spine, and I realized that my life had become a series of questions with no answers, and every familiar place suddenly felt foreign and dangerous, and I began to notice things I had ignored before, small inconsistencies in stories told by friends, by family, by neighbors, and I started to piece together a puzzle that I was never meant to see, and each revelation brought both fear and a strange excitement, because I knew that I was close to understanding the truth, and yet the closer I got, the more I realized how little I really knew and how fragile everything I had believed was. And I remembered the first time we met, how his smile had lit up a room, and how I had fallen for him instantly, and I wondered if the man I had married was the same person who now haunted my reality, or if he had been hiding something from the very beginning. And then the phone buzzed again, and I froze as I read the message, and it said simple words that made my heart pound harder than ever: "I am closer than you think." And I felt a mixture of terror and hope, because I did not know if it was a warning or an invitation or both, and I began to follow the faint trail of clues that led me into the dark corners of our lives together, and into places I had promised myself I would never go. And I discovered journals hidden in drawers, letters tucked away in boxes, secrets written in haste that spoke of fear, obsession, love, betrayal, and plans that were incomprehensible. And as I read each line, I felt as if he was speaking directly to me, even though he was nowhere in sight, and I began to wonder if the man I had loved had always been alive in spirit, even if not in body, or if he had become something else entirely, something I could not understand. And I started to question every memory, every feeling, every promise, because nothing could be taken, no longer afford, and that every person around me could be hiding intentions as dark as the night. And I began to move more cautiously, to observe, to listen, to note every detail of every interaction, because I knew that the smallest clue could unlock the next step, and that missing even one could leave me in danger forever. And the loneliness pressed on me like a storm cloud that never moved, and yet in the midst of fear I felt a strange connection to him, because the messages had reminded me that our bond was not broken, and that love and fear and obsession could exist together in ways that defied logic and reason. And I started to understand that the journey ahead would not be simple or safe or clean, and that I would have to confront not only him but also myself and everything I had been blind to. And as the weeks turned into months, I followed patterns of behavior, subtle hints and signs that led me deeper into the mystery, and every step I took made the world around me more uncertain, more fragile, more dangerous. And yet I could not stop, because I needed answers, because my heart demanded closure, because the man who was supposed to be dead had proven that nothing could ever be the same again. And every night I would lie awake wondering if the next message would be a revelation or a threat or a farewell, and every day I would replay his words in my mind, trying to decode hidden meanings and trying to anticipate his next move. And in the midst of confusion and fear, I began to discover strengths within myself, courage I had never known, patience I had never practiced, insight I had never exercised. And I realized that the mystery was shaping me into someone new, someone capable of surviving a reality that had been unthinkable before. And as I moved forward, step by step, clue by clue, revelation by revelation, I understood that the story of my life had changed, and that from that moment onward nothing would ever be ordinary, nothing would ever be simple, and nothing would ever. He was alive and watching and waiting, and I had to be ready for whatever came next, and I had to be strong even when my heart was breaking, even when my mind was spinning, even when the world seemed to be closing in from every side. And the message that had shattered my world had also ignited a fire in me, a fire of determination, of courage, of curiosity that would drive me to the very edge of everything I knew and beyond. And as I faced each new twist, each new revelation, I understood that the path ahead was not only about finding him but also about discovering who I was, who I could be, and how much fear and love and obsession the human heart could endure before it broke or transformed. And though I was terrified, I was also exhilarated, because every moment brought me closer to the truth, and every truth brought me closer to a confrontation I both feared and longed for. And the journey into the unknown had become my life, and I could not turn back. Days turned into nights, and nights into restless hours, as I wandered through the empty rooms of the house that had once been full of laughter and warmth but now echoed with silence and shadows. And every creak of the floorboards made my heart leap, as if he could be there watching unseen. And the memories of our life together kept coming back to me in fragments, flashes of joy and arguments, promises whispered in the dark, smiles that had once made my heart soar. And I could not tell which memories were real and which were part of a nightmare I could not wake from. And then the messages kept coming, small cryptic lines that hinted at his presence yet gave nothing away, and I began to feel as if I were being drawn into a game I did not understand, a puzzle where every move had consequences and every truth had layers of deception. And I noticed subtle signs that suggested he had never truly left, that someone or something had been orchestrating events behind the scenes, and I began to follow the faintest clues, little never noticed but that spoke volumes to someone who had loved him deeply, and I found myself obsessed, unable to eat, sleep, think about anything else, and the people around me seemed both familiar and alien, as if everyone had a role to play and none of them could be trusted. And then one night while reviewing old photographs I noticed a detail I had never seen before, a shadow, a reflection, a gesture that did not belong, and it sent chills down my spine, and I realized that even the most ordinary moments of our past had been imbued with secrets hidden in plain sight, and I began to retrace our steps to uncover what had been concealed. And as I dug deeper, the line between love and fear, between life and death, between truth and lies began to blur, and I understood that the man I had married and buried and yet had somehow returned had created a web of secrets that threatened to consume everything I had known and believed, and I had to navigate it, carefully measuring every word, every movement, every glance, because the next mistake could be catastrophic. And in the midst of fear I felt a strange exhilaration, a sense of purpose that I had never felt before, and I knew that this journey would not only uncover him but also reveal who I was at the core of my being, what I could endure, how far I could go, how much love and pain and betrayal I could survive. And as I pieced together each new revelation, each new clue, I felt both dread and anticipation, because the story was far from over and the ending was still unknown, and I began to understand that the man I thought I had lost had never truly been gone, and that our lives were entwined in a way that transcended conventional reality. And as the days went on, the messages grew more precise, more haunting, more intimate, and I could feel his presence even when I could not see him, and I realized that the only way to survive the unfolding nightmare was to embrace the uncertainty where it led, and I began to confront my own fears, my own doubts, my own regrets, the parts of myself I had hidden from the world and from him, because the journey was not only about finding him but also about facing the truths I had buried deep within my heart. And as I moved closer to understanding the reality of his survival, the world around me shifted, and the people I had trusted revealed new facets of themselves, and I understood that every encounter, every interaction, every whispered word could contain the key to unraveling the mystery, and I had to be vigilant, relentless, patient, cunning, and compassionate all at once. And even though terror gripped my chest and uncertainty clouded my mind, I felt a growing determination, a need to see this through to the end, no matter the cost. And as I navigated the shadows and followed the trail, I discovered hidden layers of our past, moments we had shared, secrets he had kept from everyone, including me, and slowly, piece by piece, I began to understand the scope of the life he had led in parallel with mine, and the web of lies and truths and half-truths and mysteries that defined him. And the closer I got to understanding him, the more I realized that our lives were inseparable in ways I could not have imagined, and that the truth I sought would not only answer my questions but would change me forever. And I also began to feel a pull toward him, a magnetic force that drew me into the unknown even as fear threatened to overwhelm me, and I knew that the path ahead would be filled with peril, with heartbreak, with revelations that would shatter everything I had known. And yet I could not turn back, because the man who had sent the message and the world of secrets he inhabited had become the center of my existence, and every heartbeat, every breath, every thought was consumed by the need to know the full truth, to uncover the reality behind the death, the message, the life that had been hidden from me. And as the days and nights merged into continuum, I felt my mind expanding, my courage deepening, my awareness and my understanding that the journey was transforming me in ways I could never have predicted. And though I was terrified, I was also alive, more alive than I had ever been, because the mysteries of love, of death, of betrayal, of survival had forced me to confront myself in ways that were raw and unfiltered and unstoppable. And I knew that no matter what lay at the end of this path, I would be changed forever, and nothing would ever feel ordinary again. As the weeks passed, the messages grew more frequent and more cryptic, and I began to notice patterns hidden in the timing, the wording, and the subtle hints that seemed to guide me toward places I had never paid attention to before. And every step I took into these shadows of our shared past felt like walking on a tightrope over a chasm, where the next step could lead to revelation or destruction. And I started keeping detailed notes of every interaction, every whisper, every sound in the house, in the streets outside, in the faces of people I thought I knew, and I began to feel a heightened awareness, a sensitivity to details I had never possessed before, because the man I had thought I had buried was not only alive, he was orchestrating a game that required me to be vigilant and clever and relentless. And sometimes I wondered if this was a test of my love, my loyalty, my courage, or if it was merely a twisted form of control. And yet, despite the fear and the exhaustion, despite the paranoia and the isolation, I could not help but feel drawn to the brilliance of his mind, the intensity of his presence, the undeniable force that had captivated me from the beginning. And I realized that love and fear and obsession had merged into a single overwhelming force that consumed me entirely, and at times I could not distinguish reality from illusion as I replayed past conversations in my head, scrutinized photographs, analyzed gestures, and in doing so I began to uncover layers of his life that were previously invisible to me, layers of ambition, secrecy, desperation, and brilliance that painted a picture of a man far more complex than I had ever imagined, and I started to wonder how much of him I had truly known, how much had been hidden even from me. And then the messages shifted slightly, they became more direct, more urgent, and I could feel his presence even when the phone was silent, and I began to suspect that he was watching me in ways I could not see or understand, and the realization both terrified and exhilarated me because it confirmed that he was alive and that nothing was truly ordinary, and that the rules of life and death and love that I had understood no longer applied in this new reality. And I began to follow subtle clues that led me to old places from our past, secret spots we had shared only between us, hidden letters stashed in drawers, photographs with markings that made no sense until I realized they were coordinates, instructions, riddles that only I could understand because only I had been part of the life he had led. And the more I discovered, the more I realized that his life had always been intertwined with mine, but in ways I had never suspected. And the message from that day at the funeral was merely the beginning, a trigger that had unlocked a labyrinth of secrets and puzzles that would take me to the very edge of fear and love and sanity. And I had to navigate this labyrinth carefully, weighing every action, every choice, every thought, because the cost of mistakes could be catastrophic. And as the nights wore on, I felt my body grow weary, my mind tense, my heart ache. And yet I could not stop because the story demanded completion, because the man I had loved, the man who had been declared dead, was still alive and still connected to me. And every message, every clue, every whisper led me deeper into his world and into my own psyche, forcing me to confront the darkness within him, within me, within the we had shared. And I began to understand that the journey was about more than survival. It was about transformation, about discovering the boundaries of love, of fear, of obsession, of trust and betrayal. And I felt a strange exhilaration knowing that every step I took brought me closer to understanding the ultimate truth. And yet I was aware that the truth could shatter me completely. It could destroy everything I thought I knew, and still I pressed forward, guided by instinct, by love, by a burning need for answers. And as I pieced together the fragments of our lives, the shadows of secrets, the whispers of hidden motives, I began to see a pattern, a glimpse of the man I had loved and feared and desired. And I realized that this journey was reshaping me, teaching me resilience, teaching me awareness, teaching me the limits of my heart and mind. And even though I trembled with fear, even though the nights were long and the days were heavy, and even though the world seemed filled with shadows, I felt more alive than I had ever felt, because I was awake to every detail, every nuance, every danger, and every truth. And I knew that the path ahead was uncertain, that every discovery could bring joy or horror, that every step could lead to revelation or ruin. And yet I could not turn back, because the story had claimed me, and the man who had sent that message and defied death had become the center of my existence, the gravity around which my heart and mind now revolved. And as I faced each day, I understood that the journey was far from over, and that the truth was both inevitable and terrifying, and that the life I had once known had ended the moment I read the words, "I am still alive, trust no one." And everything from that day forward was part of a story that I was both living and discovering at the same time. And as the shadows lengthened, the nights deepened, and the messages continued, I realized that nothing could prepare me for what lay ahead, but that I had no choice except to keep moving forward, to confront him, to understand him, to survive him, and to survive myself in a world where love and fear and death were inseparably intertwined, and where every heartbeat, every breath, every whisper carried the weight of a truth I was desperate to uncover. And so I pressed on into the darkness, into the unknown, into the twisted labyrinth of his life and mine, knowing that the journey would change me forever, and that the ending was yet to come. The days blurred into nights, and the nights into an endless continuum of waiting and watching, and every moment felt heavy with anticipation and dread as I moved through spaces that once held memories, now filled with shadows and silence. And I could feel him everywhere, in the faintest sounds, in the flicker of lights, in the way the air seemed to shift when I entered a room. And I began to notice details I had ignored before: a footprint in the dust, a misplaced object, a shadow where none should have been. And I realized that his presence was orchestrating my every move, and that the man I had married and buried and thought I had lost had created a game I had no choice but to play. And as the messages continued to arrive, small fragments of words, riddles, hints, and warnings, I began to unravel a part of him, a part of the life he had hidden from everyone. And I felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration, because every clue brought me closer to him and closer to a truth I could barely comprehend. And yet I could not stop, because the pull was magnetic and the obsession was irresistible, and the lines between love and fear and hate and hope became indistinguishable. And I realized that my entire existence had been reshaped by his survival, and by the messages that defied death itself. And I began to follow trails that led me to places we had shared in secrecy: old cafes, hidden corners of the city, abandoned buildings, forests where we had once walked and spoken in whispers and in each, and fears that had never touched me before, and I understood that his life had been a double life, a secret existence running parallel to the one I thought I knew, and the revelation was both intoxicating and terrifying because it meant that everything I had believed about us, about love, about trust, about life and death, was a lie, or at least a partial truth, and I began to notice patterns in his behavior, in the people around him, and in the world itself, patterns that suggested he had anticipated my actions before I had even made them, and that the game he had set in motion was designed not only to test me but to teach me to see, to observe, to question, to survive. And the realization shook me to my core because it meant that he had never really left, and that I was now an integral part of a plan I could not yet fully comprehend. And yet, despite the fear, despite the exhaustion, despite the creeping paranoia, I felt a strange exhilaration because I could feel my mind sharpening my instincts, deepening my courage, expanding my understanding of who I was and what I could endure. And I began to understand that the journey was as much about discovering myself as it was about discovering him, and that in order to survive in this world of secrets, lies, and partial truths, I would need to trust my own intuition, to follow the smallest clues, to read the faintest signals, and to act with both caution and boldness. And every day brought new revelations, new questions, new shadows, and new messages that drew me further into the labyrinth of his life and our shared history. And I began to see that love and obsession and fear and hope were all intertwined in a complex tapestry that could not be unraveled easily. And I realized that the man I had thought I had lost had been shaping my life, even in absence, even in death, even in mystery, and the pull toward him was irresistible, compelling, inevitable. And as I traced his footsteps through time, of a man both brilliant and dangerous, both loving and obsessive, both alive, and yet somehow beyond the ordinary constraints of mortality, and the realization terrified me and thrilled me in equal measure because it meant that the path ahead was uncertain, that every choice, every action, every thought could have consequences that I could not anticipate, and yet I had no choice except to continue moving forward, to face him, to understand him, to confront the reality of his survival, and to confront the truths of my own heart and mind. And in doing so I began to see the world with new eyes, noticing things I had overlooked before, noticing subtle signals in the behavior of strangers, noticing details in places I had passed 1,000 times, and realizing that the labyrinth he had created was as much about perception as about fact, as much about courage as about love. And as I delved deeper into the shadows of our shared past, I felt my heart pound with a mixture of fear, anticipation, excitement, and dread. And I understood that this journey would not end until I had uncovered every secret, every lie, every hidden thread of his life, and every step brought me closer to a confrontation that I both longed for and feared, because it promised answers and closure, and yet threatened devastation and heartbreak. And in that knowledge I felt a strange clarity, a fierce determination to see it through to the end, to survive, to understand, to uncover the truth, no matter what the cost. And though the nights were long, the days heavy, the heartache deep, and the uncertainty consuming, I pressed on, guided by instinct, love, curiosity, and a relentless need for answers, because the man who had sent that message, who had defied death, who had haunted my reality, had made it impossible to turn back. And as I followed the trail of messages, hidden clues, subtle gestures, and cryptic hints, I realized that nothing would ever be ordinary again, nothing would ever been irrevocably altered. The moment I read the words, "I am still alive, trust no one," and the journey that had begun with a message at a funeral had become the story of my life, the test of my courage, the measure of my love, and the unveiling of a truth more complicated and terrifying than anything I could have imagined. And yet I could not stop, because every moment demanded attention, every detail could reveal secrets, every breath could be a step closer to him and the resolution I both feared and craved. And as I moved forward into the unknown, into the shadows, into the labyrinth of his life and our love and our shared mysteries, I realized that I had become part of a story that was larger than me, that was darker than I had known, that was more intense, more consuming, more transformative. And I understood that no matter what lay at the end of this path, I would never be the same, and that every choice, every action, every heartbeat from this moment onward would be irrevocably tied to the man who had sent me that message, and the life he had created, and the truths he had hidden, and the journey I had no choice but to follow, to uncover him and survive myself. The story of a message from a dead husband teaches us that life is unpredictable, and that the people we trust and love may hold secrets we cannot imagine. And while betrayal and deception can shake the very foundation of our hearts, they also reveal the strength we never knew we possessed, and that in moments of fear and uncertainty we discover our resilience, our courage, and our ability to face the unknown. And that love is not always simple or pure or safe, but even in darkness it can guide us to truth if we are willing to confront it without denial or fear. And the story reminds us that we must trust our instincts and listen to the quiet voice inside that senses danger. When the world seems filled with lies and shadows, we have the power to navigate it with wisdom and bravery, and to uncover truths that others might hide from us. And it shows that fear and love are inseparable forces that can either paralyze us or empower us depending on how we respond to them, and ultimately it teaches that life is fragile and unpredictable. Trust is precious, and every choice we make shapes our destiny, and that facing challenges head-on, even when we feel weak and vulnerable, is what transforms us into someone stronger and more aware and capable, and that the darkest moments often contain the lessons we need the most, and that in embracing the chaos and confronting the hidden truths we emerge wiser, resilient, and capable of handling anything the world throws at us.